My name is Evelyn May Harrington, and I am 82 years old. I wasn't always this fragile woman with thin silver hair and trembling hands. Once upon a time, I was strong. I built a home, I raised 4 children, and I thought my love was enough to hold us together. But life has a cruel way of showing you where you truly stand. And nothing prepared me for the day I realized. My children no longer saw me as their mother. They saw me as a burden. And worse, an obstacle to their inheritance. It all began one cold November morning in Michigan. The trees outside had shed their leaves, and the wind howled like a warning. I was sitting at my kitchen table, holding my favorite mug, chipped at the edges but filled with warm chamomile tea. My bones ached, but I still believed I had a place in this world. That's when the knock came at the door. It wasn't gentle. It was sharp. Final. I opened the door, and there they were. My 4 children, standing shoulder to shoulder like soldiers ready for battle. Caleb, my eldest son, tall and broad-shouldered, with that cold businessman's stare he had perfected in his corporate world. Naomi, my only daughter, once my sunshine, now with lips pressed tight as though smiling at me required too much effort. Silas, the quiet one, whose eyes darted everywhere except my face. And finally, Jonah, my baby, who used to run into my arms when thunderstorms scared him. Now, he carried an envelope in his hand like a weapon. "Mom," Caleb began, his voice flat. "We've been talking, and we think it's time." My heart skipped. Time. Time for what? Naomi stepped forward, her perfume too strong, her words sharper. "You can't stay here alone anymore. It's unsafe. You need care. A facility will be better for you." I laughed nervously. "A nursing home? I don't need that. I'm still walking, still cooking, still." Jonah shoved the envelope into my hand. "Mom, it's already arranged. You're leaving today." My throat tightened. Today? Without asking me? Without even letting me pack my memories? Memories? Caleb muttered. "This house isn't safe. And besides..." He glanced at Naomi, who finished the sentence for him. "It's time we put things in order." I didn't understand then, but I would soon learn. Putting things in order meant taking everything I had ever worked for. They drove me to a nursing home on the outskirts of town, the kind that looked decent on the outside but smelled of bleach and sadness on the inside. The nurses greeted my children warmly, like they were doing the right thing. But not once did anyone ask what I wanted. I sat in the back seat, clutching that chipped mug I had refused to leave behind. I stared out the window as the familiar streets disappeared, replaced by long stretches of highway. It felt like a funeral procession. When we arrived, Naomi kissed my cheek lightly, like she was kissing a stranger. "We'll visit," she promised, her voice sugar-sweet but hollow. But visits never came. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. I kept waiting for a phone call, a hug, a sign that I wasn't forgotten. But instead, one day, I overheard the nurses talking. "Did you hear about Mrs. Harrington? Her kids told everyone she passed away. Even had an obituary in the paper." My blood ran cold. Dead. I rushed to the common room, shaking, demanding a newspaper. And there it was, my name, printed in black ink, with a fake obituary describing my peaceful passing. My children had declared me dead. Not sick. Not resting. Dead. I sank into the chair, gasping for air. Tears streamed down my face. They wanted me erased. Why? The answer came days later, when a kind nurse whispered the truth. "They sold your house. Your accounts. Everything. They said you left it all to them." My children had stolen my life while I was still breathing. But let me tell you something. Evelyn May Harrington may have been old, but she was not finished. They thought I was weak. They thought I would fade quietly into the background. But they forgot one thing. A mother's memory is long. And revenge is sweeter when it is slow. That day, staring at my fake obituary, I swore to myself, if they wanted me dead, I would come back to life in a way they never expected. What would you do if your own children betrayed you like this? Let me know in the comments. I'm eager to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe, because my story is only just beginning. The first night in that nursing home felt like being buried alive. I lay in a narrow bed with stiff white sheets that smelled faintly of bleach. The walls were a pale yellow, peeling in spots, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights buzzed like a mosquito I couldn't swat away. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the sound of my own home. My clock ticking in the hallway, the creak of the stairs, the faint whistle of the kettle on the stove. But all I could hear now were the muffled groans of the old man in the room across the hall, and the metallic clank of a cart being wheeled by. I wasn't at home. I wasn't free. And, according to the world outside, I wasn't even alive. The next morning, I shuffled to the cafeteria with the help of a nurse. They served me watery oatmeal and lukewarm coffee in a plastic cup. I pushed the food around with my spoon, barely able to eat. "First day?" asked a voice. I looked up and saw an elderly woman with sharp blue eyes sitting across from me. She wore her gray hair in 2 braids, neat and precise. Her name tag read Doris. "You'll get used to it," she said, sipping her coffee like she had surrendered long ago. "We all do." "I don't want to get used to it," I muttered. "My children put me here." Doris gave a bitter laugh. "Join the club, honey. Half of us are here because our kids wanted our houses. The other half because they wanted us out of the way." Her words stung, but I knew she was right. For weeks, I lived in that place, moving like a ghost. Nurses came and went. I watched the seasons change through the window. But my children never came. Not once. Every Sunday, families visited the other residents, bringing flowers, balloons, hugs. The halls filled with laughter. My corner stayed quiet. I began to feel invisible, forgotten, like I had been erased from my own story. Then one evening, while folding my sweater, a nurse named Angela slipped into my room. She was young, barely 30, with warm brown eyes and a voice that always sounded like she was smiling. "Mrs. Harrington," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder, "I need to tell you something." I sat up, my heart pounding. "What is it?" She handed me a folded piece of paper. "I shouldn't be doing this, but you deserve to know." With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a copy of a property record. My house, my home of 47 years, had been sold 2 weeks after I was admitted. The names on the deed? Caleb and Naomi. I nearly dropped the paper. They sold it. Without me. Without my consent. Angela bit her lip. "They claimed you were deceased. They even filed a death certificate." My knees buckled, and I sat back on the bed. Dead. They had written me off as if my breath didn't matter, as if my heartbeat was a nuisance. "They can't get away with this," I whispered, clutching the paper. Angela leaned closer. "It won't be easy. They have the money, the connections. But I believe you can fight back." Her faith lit a spark inside me. That night, I didn't cry. For the first time since arriving, I didn't feel helpless. I sat up in my bed, staring at the moonlight spilling across the floor. I thought of the years I spent working 2 jobs after my husband died, teaching during the day, waitressing at night, just to keep that house. I thought of Christmas mornings when I scraped together pennies for gifts, the roof repairs I handled on my own, the sacrifices no one thanked me for. And now my children had taken it all. But they underestimated me. They thought because I was 82, I was powerless. They thought because I lived behind locked doors, I was finished. They forgot I had lived through wars, recessions, heartbreaks. They forgot I had raised 4 ungrateful children with nothing but grit and faith. If they declared me dead, then so be it. I would rise from the grave they dug for me. The following week, I began to plan. Doris laughed at me when I told her. Plan? What are you gonna do, Evelyn? Break out of here like some kind of prison escape movie? I smiled faintly. Maybe. Doris shook her head. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But trust me, this place doesn't let go easily. And neither do greedy children. Her doubt only fueled me more. I started small. I wrote letters in secret, letters addressed to people from my past, an old friend named Margaret who still lived in town, the pastor from my church, even the lawyer who once helped me settle my husband's estate. I didn't know if any of them would reach me, but I had to try. Angela, bless her soul, agreed to sneak the letters out. She also gave me a small notebook where I began documenting everything. The date I was admitted, the names of the nurses, the forged paperwork. If I was going to fight, I needed evidence. Every night, I wrote like a woman possessed. Every stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Then one afternoon, something happened that made my blood boil hotter than ever. A new resident arrived, an elderly man with a cane and a kind smile. As the staff settled him into the room across from mine, I overheard a nurse mention his last name. Harrington. My stomach dropped. That was my name. My husband's name. Later that evening, I introduced myself. Hello, I'm Evelyn Harrington. He looked startled. Funny. My grandson married a Harrington. Naomi, I think. My heart stopped. Naomi? He nodded. Yes, she and her brother Caleb bought a house recently. Beautiful place. They had a big celebration. Told everyone their mother had passed away and left it to them. The walls seemed to spin. They were celebrating my death. In that moment, I knew forgiveness was no longer an option. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I looked at my wrinkled hands, the veins that stood out like blue rivers. I wasn't as strong as I once was, but I still had my mind. I still had my will. And I still had the one thing they didn't expect, time. I whispered to myself, they think I'm dead. But I'm coming back. And when I do, I'll ruin them. People often believe revenge comes with rage, loud battles, or fiery confrontations. But mine began in silence. In whispers. In the stillness of long nights when the world thought I was gone. By day, I played the part of the frail old woman in the nursing home. Quiet, compliant, invisible. But by night, I sharpened my mind like a blade. I, Evelyn May Harrington, the woman they buried alive, would rise. One evening, Angela, the kind nurse who risked a job to help me, slipped into my room again. She carried a small manila folder under her arm. I did some digging, she whispered. She pulled out photocopies of documents, my so-called death certificate, forged signatures, the deed transfer for my house. I stared at them, my stomach churning. There it was. Proof. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had committed crimes. Angela placed her hand on mine. Mrs. Harrington, if you want to fight this, you need allies. You can't do it alone. Her words echoed in my head all night. Allies. The next morning, I decided to test the waters. At breakfast, I sat across from Doris again. She raised an eyebrow at my sudden spark of energy. You look like a woman with a secret, she said, smirking. Maybe I am, I replied. So I told her, carefully in pieces, about the papers, the betrayal, my children selling my home. She slammed her spoon down. Those ungrateful brats. If I had the strength, I'd march out there and slap sense into all 4 of them. I laughed softly. Maybe we don't need strength. Maybe we need strategy. Doris leaned in closer. What do you have in mind? And just like that, I had my first ally. But Doris wasn't the only one. Over the next weeks, I observed the other residents. There was Mr. Langley, a retired accountant with a sharp memory for numbers. There was Clara, a quiet woman in a wheelchair whose son had stolen her pension. And Harold, an ex-soldier who still carried himself with discipline, even if his body had weakened. We were a forgotten army, each with our own wounds from the people who should have loved us most. One afternoon, I gathered them in the corner of the recreation room. The television blared some old sitcom no one was really watching, so we spoke in hushed tones. I need your help, I said firmly. My children have erased me. They stole my house, my money, my name. But I won't let them win. I plan to ruin them. And I can't do it alone. Silence. Then Harold gave a small nod. Tell us what to do. And just like that, I had a team. Our first mission was communication. I needed to reach the outside world, the one my children thought I was cut off from. Phones in the nursing home were monitored. Mail was sometimes opened. But Angela helped me find a loophole. The staff break room had an old computer with limited internet access. One night, when most of the residents were asleep, Angela snuck me in. My hands trembled as I touched the keyboard. It had been years since I'd used one. But muscle memory returned, slowly. I logged into an old email account I hadn't used since my teaching days. The inbox was dusty, filled with spam and forgotten notes, but it was mine. And then I began writing. I wrote to Margaret, my dearest friend. I wrote to Pastor Williams. I even wrote to a local journalist whose articles I remembered reading. I told them everything. How my children declared me dead, how they stole my property, how I was trapped in a nursing home. With every keystroke, I felt alive again. When I hit send, I whispered to myself, Evelyn, you've just dug your way out of the grave. Days passed. No word came back. I began to wonder if anyone cared, or if my emails had vanished into the void. Then one afternoon, while we were playing bingo in the rec room, a staff member called my name over the intercom. Mrs. Harrington, you have a visitor. My heart leapt. I walked, trembling, to the front lobby. And there she was, Margaret, my lifelong friend. Her auburn hair had turned white, but her fiery spirit shone through her eyes. Evelyn, she cried, rushing to hug me. The tears came before I could stop them. You came. You actually came. She pulled back, looking at me with fury and heartbreak. I read your email. I couldn't believe it. They said you were dead. I went to your funeral, Evelyn. I wept for you. Her words cut deep. They made everyone believe it, I whispered. But I'm still here. And I need your help. Margaret gripped my hands. Anything. Whatever it takes. From that day, Margaret became my lifeline. She visited regularly, sneaking in supplies, paper, pens, even a prepaid cell phone small enough to hide in my dresser. With it, I began contacting others. Lawyers, journalists, anyone who might listen. Of course, I had to be careful. If my children found out I was alive and stirring trouble, they might try to silence me for good. But I wasn't afraid anymore. One night, I gathered my little army of residents. We sat in a circle, whispering like children sharing ghost stories. Step 1, I said, is proof. I need pictures, documents, testimonies. Anything that shows I'm alive and that my children lied. Mr. Langley tapped his temple. I can keep track of the numbers, dates, bank records, inconsistencies. Clara raised her hand timidly. I know someone who works at the county office. They might get us copies of the forged certificate. Harold smirked. And I can distract the staff if needed. Old soldiers' tricks. I looked around at their determined faces. We were no longer just residents. We were conspirators, survivors, fighters. But the real test came 2 weeks later. I received a letter from the lawyer who once handled my husband's estate, Mr. Whitaker. He agreed to meet me, but only if I could prove I was who I claimed to be. After all, in the eyes of the law, I was already dead. So Angela helped me smuggle out a lock of my hair and an old family photo I had hidden in my Bible. Margaret delivered them to Whitaker. When he finally visited me, his face was pale, his hands shaking. "Mrs. Harrington," he said softly, "I buried you in my records. Your children filed all the paperwork. But you're alive. Alive and ready to fight," I told him, my voice firm. He sat down heavily. "If what you say is true, your children committed fraud, perjury, theft. But this will be a war." I looked him straight in the eye. "Then let the war begin." That night, lying in my narrow bed, I didn't feel trapped anymore. I felt powerful. For the first time in months, I could almost hear my husband's voice, steady and strong. "Atta girl. Evelyn. Show them who you are." I smiled into the darkness. My children thought they buried me with lies. But I was only planting the seeds of their downfall. And soon, the world would watch them crumble. They call the law blind, but I learned quickly she isn't dumb. She just listens to whoever shouts the loudest or pays the most. I intended to make a noise so loud the world could not ignore it. I may have been 82, but I had patience, a plan, and people who believed me. When Mr. Whitaker agreed to take my case, the first thing he did was look at me like I was fragile glass that might shatter at the wrong word. "You'll need stamina, Evelyn," he said, pouring 2 coffees with hands that trembled only slightly from age, "not fear. This will take time. They will fight back. They have resources." "I have time," I replied, "and a short memory for mercy when it comes to liars." He smiled then, a tired humor. "All right. The first move is to get your legal status fixed. We'll have to petition the court to set aside the death certificate and the deed transfer. Then we'll open an investigation into the fraud." The word investigation felt like a warm blanket. Finally, my voice found a listener with authority. For months I had been cataloging small betrayals like a tax audit of grief, phone calls that never came, the way the family Bible had disappeared from my shelf, neighbors who had been told to keep silent. Whitaker held my stack of papers, ran his fingers along the edges, and promised to make them speak. But I also knew the law could be slow. It could twist and turn. The kind of ruin I intended for my children wouldn't only come from court orders and legal judgments. It would come from exposure, people knowing what they had done. There is a special kind of embarrassment that does more damage than money. The public seeing your face next to the word fraud. I wanted that shame to burn. So while Whitaker started the formal work, my other allies, Margaret, Angela, Doris, Mr. Langley, Clara, and Harold, began creating the other arm of our attack, public truth. I'll tell you now. There were nights I sat alone and thought it would be easier to forgive. I held that thought in my hands, inspected it, and then set it down. Forgiveness wasn't for them. It was for me. But right now, I needed justice, and justice in my case required witnesses. The first witness was a small thing, a stopped clock. My neighbor at the time I was taken, Mrs. Reynolds, a widowed schoolteacher who lived across the street before Caleb and Naomi sold the house, kept a diary. She had written about my odd disappearance, about a man in a suit who came by with papers, about the way Naomi had cried on her porch the night before I was taken, a performance Mrs. Reynolds felt all the way in her bones. Margaret tracked her down. She agreed to testify that she had seen Naomi and Caleb at my house the week I was taken, moving boxes at odd hours, disposing of old things as if they had been unwanted. Next was the neighbor who had spoken at my funeral in the local obituary forum, an old retired pastor who had been coaxed into giving a eulogy at a small gathering. He had been told the funeral was private. He had no idea I was alive. He was horrified when Margaret called him and he learned the truth. He agreed to speak on my behalf in any hearing. He told a reporter, and the reporter's eyes got wide. Pastors don't like to be used as pawns, and he was not shy about telling that with a voice that caught on righteous anger. Little threads like these, stitched together, create an ugly braid of proof. Mr. Langley did the math on transactions. He found a suspicious withdrawal a day after my admission, an amount large enough to suggest a down payment on a house. Clara's contact at the county office got us copies of the signed deed and the identities on the transfer. The signatures were clumsy in places, like hands that had hurried. Whitaker narrowed his eyes and said the word forgery as if tasting it. When he filed the petition to declare the death certificate void, the courtroom smelled like paper and power. My legs shook when I walked in, but I walked in. Margaret sat in the front row like a soldier. Angela had told a few close friends who had been outraged enough to come. The judge looked over his glasses, and I could tell he'd seen worse and better. He listened while Whitaker laid out the facts. A woman declared dead, her property transferred within weeks, inconsistencies and witnesses. And then the first of my children appeared. Caleb. He sat with his arms folded, his jaw hard like a door slammed shut. Naomi followed later, wearing designer grief like a costume. Silas and Jonah sent attorneys at first and then showed up themselves as the hearing opened. They had practiced their faces. They had purchase receipts and affidavits. They had plausible deniability and carefully culled statements. Your Honor, Caleb began, his voice smooth and controlled. My mother had been deteriorating. We did what we thought was best. You filed a death certificate, Whitaker countered. On what basis? Caleb's eyes flicked to mine as if seeking permission to lie. I met his gaze cleanly. He scowled, then looked away. At that moment, a ripple of something like triumph passed through me. He wanted me to look small. I would not oblige him. The judge did something efficient then. He ordered an immediate stay on any further transfers until the matter could be investigated. Simple, small, legal, like putting a bandage on a wound. It stopped the bleeding, but it didn't heal anything. After the hearing, the car ride home was a white blur. I remember the smell of perfume in the back seat and Naomi's whisper, "We can't let her make us look bad." Jonah clutched his phone. Silas stared out the window, avoiding the eyes of the woman who had raised him and whom he had allowed to be declared dead. That night, I slept poorly. Not because I feared the court, though I did. I slept poorly because the attack had officially started. My children were angry, and angry people use whatever tools they can find. They tried to cut me off in ways both subtle and cruel. Shortly after the court ordered the stay, the nursing home received a call. They were told there had been a complaint about the care I was receiving and that an investigator from an elder care agency would be arriving the next day to inspect. Such calls make a facility nervous. They're careful with scandal. The investigator came, clipboard and badge, making suggestions about physical therapy and different care plans. The nursing home took their advice to heart. And then, in a move that choked me with cold bile, they moved me from my familiar room to a smaller one nearer the back entrance. Far from visitors, where the phones had poor reception and the corridor lights were dim. They said it was transitional, that it was to help monitor my needs. I watched the windows shrink and felt the walls get closer. You might be safer in here, the director told me with a practiced smile. Less stimulation. I thought of their words later and understood the language of erasure. Safety often means being out of the world. But they couldn't move the truth. Once Whitaker filed the motions, official letters were mailed. Journalists who smelled a story began to call. I sat on a cot and watched as my quiet world rippled with rumor and then reality. A local paper, small town, my kind of paper, ran a story once Margaret had spoken to a reporter. The headline called it a possible family fraud. My children called angry late-night calls to the editor. They emailed letters denying everything and threatening legal action. It was the dance of people who had something to hide, deny, threaten, delay. In the quiet hours before dawn, when everyone else slept, I would sometimes hear Naomi sob once in her bedroom, the way someone sobs when their well-practiced mask begins to crack. Once, I caught a glimpse of Caleb on the phone at 3 in the morning, voice sharp. They were scared. They were angry. They were human in that flicker. The court battle continued, and Whitaker began to ask for more. Bank records, phone records, the notarized documents the children claimed supported the transfer. The bank, an institution that often prefers profit over compassion, was less cooperative than I'd hoped. Caleb and Naomi had arranged for power of attorney forms with signatures that, when compared to my known handwriting, contained small but telling differences. The bank sent a letter back. Because the forms had been signed and the bank had acted in good faith, it would resist returning funds without a legally binding order. That meant more motions, and more hearings, and a public record that allowed the press into our family business. You would think that living through this would exhaust me, and perhaps it did in small parts. But there's a curious caffeine in anger when it's righteous. I was not weary. I was steady. One evening, a man I had never met appeared in my room. He introduced himself as Ethan Crowley, a reporter from the state's largest paper. He said he had read about my case online and wanted to sit down. I felt a thrill. My story moving beyond my small town. People read big papers. People with big ears acted differently. He had questions, precise ones, and he came prepared with a recorder. I told him things I had been keeping in a box like contraband. How the funeral had been a sham, the sloppy way the deed had been signed, the coldness of their voices when they told me they'd arranged for a better home. Ethan's eyes narrowed as I spoke, and when he left he promised a peace that would not be comfortable for my children. He promised the kind of headline that might make them sweat. But I learned something then about light and shadows. Once truth is in a public square, liars have to scramble. They change their stories. They try to create alibis. They lean on institutions for cover. You see them scratch and pretend. I relished watching them scramble, not because I wanted humiliation for its own sake, but because the world needed to see what greed can do. There were nights I dreamed of binding the 4 of them with rope and standing before them like a lightning-armed woman. In the morning, I would sip my coffee and remember I had law and allies. I would write another letter. I would call another witness. I would wait for the court dates. And I would plan. When you are old, people talk to you like you are slow. They lower their voices, they finish your sentences, as if your mind wandered. That gave me a strategic advantage. I learned to float beneath others' expectations. I became a whisper in broad daylight and a storm in the night. They had taken my house. They had tried to take my name. But they had not taken my will. Justice, when it comes, is not always swift. It is, however, patient. And patience, in the hands of someone who has lived 8 decades, is a tool of great weight. Tonight, as I write this, the papers have not yet laid the final slugs of the truth across a full headline. The bank still clings to its cautious policies. The nursing home still speaks in practiced concern. My children still sleep in the beds bought with the money that once paid for my roof. But the tide has turned. The first legal hold is in place. Journalists are asking questions. Witnesses have come forward. My small army of elders gathers each evening and reports successes as if we were generals planning the next day's march. I almost laugh sometimes at how theatrical my life has become. I used to teach history. Now I live it. And my children will be a footnote in the wrong chapter. Have you ever watched a family secret explode into public view? Share your story in the comments. How did the truth come out? Subscribe and ring the bell. The next chapter is where the cracks start to show in my children's perfect lives. When I finally left the courthouse that day, the air outside felt sharper, colder, like even the Michigan wind knew I had just made a dangerous vow. I was no longer just Evelyn May Harrington, 82, forgotten and discarded by her own blood. No. I was a ghost who had been declared dead by the very children she once carried in her arms. And this ghost was walking back into the world to haunt them. I had spent months in that nursing home being treated like a shadow. Nobody called me Evelyn. I was just another patient with thinning hair and too many wrinkles. But when that clerk at the courthouse looked at me with pity, her words rang in my bones. "Ma'am, your children filed the papers. They swore you were gone. That makes your estate theirs. Gone. They buried me on paper. They sold my home, my furniture, even my old rocking chair that had survived 3 generations of bedtime stories. And all while I was still breathing. So, I made a decision. If the world thought I was dead, then I would rise from that grave and show them what it meant to misjudge a mother's strength. At the courthouse, I wasn't alone. Remember Mrs. Lillian Carpenter? The widow who sat next to me during bingo nights? The one with eyes too sharp to belong in a place like that? She had followed me into town that day. And when I stormed out of the clerk's office shaking with fury, she was waiting by the bench. "Well?" she asked. "They declared me dead," I whispered. "My own children signed the papers. They took everything." Her jaw tightened. "Then you ruined them." That was it. Not pity. Not a sigh. Just 4 words that felt like iron being placed in my spine. From that moment, Lillian became my partner. She had once been married to a lawyer, and though he had passed long ago, she still remembered how to read forms, how to dig through public records, how to find cracks in the walls of carefully built lies. We went back to the nursing home, but not as beaten women. We returned like generals planning a war. Night after night, we sat in the small TV lounge with papers spread across the table while the other residents slept. Lillian showed me how to request documents, how to read the deeds, how to trace where the money had gone after my death. And what we found made my heart twist into something darker. My eldest son Caleb had transferred my house into his name and then sold it within 2 weeks for triple the value. Naomi had drained my bank account, justifying it with forged medical bills, claiming she had cared for me in my final years. Silas had taken my pension checks, cashing them monthly as though I were still alive, because on paper, I wasn't alive. Jonah, my baby, had gone further. He had sold off my jewelry. My wedding ring, my grandmother's locket, the pearls my late husband gave me on our 40th anniversary. Each page felt like another dagger, each signature proof that they didn't just want my things. They wanted to erase me completely. One night, I came across something that nearly broke me. In the pile of documents, there was a newspaper clipping. Naomi had given an interview when she announced my death. In it, she called me a loving but fragile mother who passed peacefully in her sleep. There was even a photograph of the 4 of them standing together, arms linked, smiling like grieving saints. And at the bottom the article read, "Survived by her children, who honor her legacy by preserving the Harrington name." I stared at that word. Legacy. My children had stolen mine. I thought about the nights I went without food so they could eat. The hours I stitched their clothes. The winters I worked double shifts in the factory just to keep heat in the house. And this was how they honored me. By killing me before death had the chance. "You can't just sit with this," Lillian said one evening, her voice low but fierce. "You've got to fight. Make them see you're still here." "How?" I whispered. "I'm just an old woman with shaky hands." Then use those shaky hands to sign the papers that bring them down. Her eyes gleamed with fire. "You need a lawyer, Evelyn. A good one. Someone who hates injustice more than they love money." "But lawyers cost money." She leaned closer, her wrinkled lips curling into a smile. "Then it's a good thing I know someone who owes me a favor." That night, she wrote a name and number on a piece of paper. His name's David Whittaker. He's young, hungry, and reckless enough to take your case. And Evelyn, she gripped my wrist. You're not fighting just for yourself. You're fighting for every mother who's ever been thrown away. The next day, with trembling fingers, I dialed that number from the payphone in the nursing home lobby. Whittaker Law, a brisk voice answered. This is Evelyn Harrington, I said, my voice quivering. I need help. My children said I'm dead. But I'm not. There was a pause on the line. And then, almost like fate had leaned in, the young lawyer replied. Ma'am, if what you're saying is true, then we're about to raise hell. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my narrow nursing home bed, staring at the ceiling tiles. For months, I had thought I was powerless. For months, I had believed I was just waiting to die. But now, something burned in my chest. Not just anger. Not just grief. Something sharper. A promise. My children had buried me alive. But they had forgotten one thing. The dead don't stay buried when they have unfinished business. I was Evelyn May Harrington. And I was coming back. If your children betrayed you like this, would you forgive them or fight back? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. And stay tuned, because what I did next will shock you even more. The first time I met David Whittaker, I thought he was far too young to carry the kind of storm I needed. He couldn't have been more than 30, with sandy hair that never seemed to stay in place, a loosened tie, and eyes that burned with something I hadn't seen in decades, righteous anger. He walked into that dull beige nursing home lobby like a gust of fresh air, carrying a leather satchel full of papers. His shoes squeaked on the linoleum floor, and the receptionist raised her brows like lawyers didn't belong in a place like this. But when his eyes found mine, he didn't see a frail old woman. He saw a fighter. He sat across from me at a plastic table in the corner, flipping open his notepad. Tell me everything. From the moment they came to your house to the moment you saw your obituary in the newspaper. I told him. My voice cracked sometimes, but I held nothing back. The way Caleb shoved papers in my face, how Naomi smiled like she was doing me a favor, how Silas and Jonah stayed silent but complicit. By the end, David's jaw was tight. He slammed his pen down. Ma'am, this isn't just family betrayal. This is fraud. This is elder abuse. And it's illegal. I blinked. But they're my children. Then that makes it worse, he snapped. Because if strangers had done this, everyone would be screaming for justice. But when it's family, people like to hush it up. Well, I don't hush. For the first time in months, I felt something spread through me that wasn't despair. Hope. Over the next weeks, David became my lifeline. He visited twice a week, bringing forms, copies of deeds, forged medical bills, and statements of bank transfers. All things Lillian and I had already uncovered. But now, in David's hands, those papers weren't just memories of betrayal. They were weapons. Look at this, he said one afternoon, slapping a document on the table. Your daughter Naomi claimed you needed 24-hour in-home care for 2 years. She filed for reimbursement from your insurance. Except you weren't receiving care. You were living alone, cooking your meals, walking to church every Sunday. I nodded slowly, my eyes misty. And Caleb, he didn't just sell your house. He sold it to a company he secretly owns. He's been flipping it for profit. That's a double scam. My hands shook. And Jonah. David's mouth hardened. He liquidated your jewelry. He even signed away your husband's war medals at an auction. That's federal-level fraud. Every word was like a stone dropped into my chest, heavy but strengthening. The more I learned, the less I saw my children as the babies I once held. They had become something else. Predators. At night, when the halls of the nursing home were quiet and the only sound was the hum of machines, doubt would creep in. Was I really strong enough to fight this? Was it right to drag my children's names through the mud, even if they had dragged mine into a grave? One night, I whispered to the ceiling, "Harold, if you were here, what would you tell me?" My husband had been gone 10 years, but I swore I felt his voice in the stillness. "Fight for what you built, Evelyn. Fight for the woman you still are." And so, I did. The day David filed the first lawsuit in probate court, I was terrified. He explained it in simple terms so my old ears could follow. "We're suing for fraud, estate theft, and elder abuse. If we win, everything they took comes back to you, and they could face prison time." Prison. That word shook me. Could I really put my own flesh and blood behind bars? David must have seen my hesitation, because he leaned across the table, his voice softening. "Mrs. Harrington, sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about truth. The world thinks you're dead. Don't you want to stand in front of them alive?" And oh, how I did. Back at the nursing home, Lillian grinned like a proud general when I told her about the lawsuit. "Good. Now they'll learn. You don't spit on the woman who gave you life." She grabbed my hand, squeezing it hard. "They think you're too old to fight. Prove them wrong. Prove them all wrong." Weeks later, the court date came for the preliminary hearing. I walked into that grand courtroom with David at my side. My cane tapped against the marble floor, echoing like a drumbeat of war. And then I saw them. My 4 children, sitting together at the defendant's table. Caleb's smug confidence faltered when his eyes landed on me. Naomi gasped, her hand flying to her chest as though she had seen a ghost. And in a way she had. Silas looked pale, his lips trembling. Jonah couldn't even meet my eyes. I lifted my chin. "Surprise," I whispered. The courtroom erupted into whispers. The woman declared dead was standing right there, alive, breathing, and ready to fight. That day, as I sat on the witness bench, I wasn't just Evelyn the mother anymore. I was Evelyn the survivor. Evelyn the avenger. Evelyn the woman who would not go quietly into any grave, paper or otherwise. And I made a vow right there, my heart thundering in my chest. By the time this fight was over, my children would learn that betrayal of a mother does not come without a price. The sound of my cane against the marble echoed through the courtroom as I made my way to my seat. Every step felt like thunder. I could see people whispering, leaning toward one another, their eyes wide. They had read my obituary, mourned my supposed passing, and now here I was, breathing, walking, and ready to strike. My children sat stiffly at the long wooden table, their eyes locked on me with disbelief. Naomi was the first to react. She pressed her hand to her chest as if she might faint. Her lips moved but no words came out, her perfectly painted face cracking at the edges. Caleb leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening, his eyes dark with calculation. Silas couldn't even meet my gaze. His head was bowed, his hands clenched in fists that trembled slightly. Jonah, my baby, the one who once clung to me when thunderstorms rolled through our town, looked like he had been caught stealing candy. His eyes darted everywhere but to me. When the judge entered and the room rose, I remained standing tall, gripping my cane like it was a sword. I wasn't just a frail old woman anymore. I was the ghost they had tried to bury, and I had come back to haunt them. David stood at my side, his voice steady and sharp as he spoke. "Your Honor, this case is about more than fraud. It's about betrayal of the deepest kind. My client, Mrs. Evelyn Harrington, was declared dead while she was still alive. Her own children forged documents, sold her home, emptied her accounts, and buried her name in ink. Today, she stands before this court not only alive but demanding justice." The courtroom erupted into murmurs. I saw the jury members glance at me, some with pity, others with shock, a few with disgust at the thought of children discarding their mother like trash. Caleb whispered something to Naomi, his face red with anger. She glared at me, her mask slipping, her bitterness spilling through. When it was my turn to testify, I stood slowly, my legs shaking, but my voice strong. I told them everything, from the knock at my door that November morning to the moment I found my own obituary. My voice broke when I described how they drove me away from my home without giving me time to say goodbye to the walls that had heard my children's laughter. Tears stung my eyes as I remembered the chipped mug I carried with me, the only piece of my life I refused to surrender. I looked directly at my children as I spoke, and their faces betrayed them. Jonah shifted uncomfortably, his guilt plain. Silas refused to look at me, hiding behind shame. Naomi kept her chin high, pretending she was the victim, her arms crossed in defiance. And Caleb? Oh, Caleb stared at me like I was nothing but an obstacle in his path. My words did not soften him. They enraged him. He saw me not as his mother but as the one standing between him and the fortune he thought was his. David presented the documents, each one a dagger. Forged signatures. Fake medical bills. Transfer records. Auction slips with my wedding ring and Harold's war medals listed as estate liquidation. Each page was proof that my children had not only stolen from me but had done so with cold calculation. The jury's eyes grew darker with every revelation. When it was their turn to speak, Caleb took charge. His voice was smooth, too smooth, like a salesman who believed charm could erase the truth. He claimed they acted in my best interest, that I was confused, that I had asked them to take care of my affairs because I was declining. Naomi added her rehearsed tears, saying she loved me so much she couldn't bear to see me live alone. Silas mumbled a few words about responsibility, his voice cracking. And Jonah said nothing at all, his silence heavier than any lie. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to shout that love does not look like signatures on forged death papers, that care does not come in the form of stealing a mother's home while she's still alive. But instead, I let the evidence speak. I let the world see me alive. That was my weapon. The hearing ended that day with no verdict, only a date set for trial. But as I walked past them, cane striking the floor with each step, I whispered so only they could hear. You thought I was gone. But I am here. And I will not stop until everything you took is ripped from your hands. Naomi's face turned pale. Jonah dropped his eyes. Silas swallowed hard. Caleb smirked, but his smirk was brittle, like glass ready to crack. When I left the courthouse, the cold Michigan air hit my face, sharp and unforgiving. But inside me, there was fire. For months, they had buried me. For months, they had lived comfortably with my things, with my name, with my life. But now, the dead had risen. And the reckoning was only beginning. I knew the fight ahead would not be easy. They were my children, yes, but they had also become my enemies. The trial would tear us apart in ways that could never be mended. But as I leaned on my cane and looked up at the gray sky, I made peace with that. They had killed me once. I would not let them kill me again. That night, back in my narrow nursing home bed, I whispered to Harold again. I did it, my love. I stood in front of them. I let them see me alive. And in the silence, I felt strength rush through me. The storm had begun, and I was no longer afraid. The trial began on a gray morning. The courthouse loomed like a giant stone beast, swallowing us whole as we walked inside. My cane tapped against the cold marble floors, steady and sharp, every sound reminding me that I was still alive. David walked beside me with his satchel of evidence, his eyes blazing with determination. Behind me, Lillian squeezed my hand and whispered, "Make them bleed truth." Inside the courtroom, the jury sat in silence, their faces unreadable. Reporters had begun to gather in the back, whispering about the woman declared dead by her children. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room pressing down on me, but I held my chin high. My children filed in together, but there was no unity in their steps. Caleb strode confidently, his suit sharp, his smirk sharper. Naomi floated in with her pearl necklace, pretending to be the dutiful daughter. Silas shuffled in, pale and trembling. Jonah lagged behind, looking like a lost boy who had wandered into the wrong place. They sat at their table, avoiding one another's eyes, and I thought, good, let them rot in their own silence. The prosecution began with the documents. Page after page was displayed on the screen for the jury. Forged signatures, false medical bills, property transfers, auction slips. Each one was a nail in the coffin they had built for me. David's voice rang clear, steady, slicing through their excuses. This woman was alive. She was breathing, walking, speaking. Yet her children declared her dead. And they did it not out of love, not out of concern, but out of greed. When it was their turn, Caleb spoke first. He tried to twist the truth, painting himself as a son burdened with responsibility, a man who only wanted to protect his fragile mother. Naomi cried on cue, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Silas stumbled through his words, muttering about misunderstandings. Jonah sat in silence, his shame heavier than any defense he could muster. But then came the witnesses. A neighbor from my old street testified that she had seen me gardening days before my children announced my death. She said, Evelyn was out there planting tulips. I waved to her. Then a week later, I heard she was gone. I thought I'd lost my mind. The jury leaned forward, listening closely. A nurse from the nursing home testified that I had arrived healthy, confused, and heartbroken, carrying nothing but a chipped mug. She told the court, she kept asking why her children didn't visit. She didn't even know she'd been declared dead. The room went still. And then, the secrets began to spill. David produced records showing Caleb had funneled the money from my house into a shell company. But what shocked even me was the revelation that he had used that company to cover gambling debts. The proud, perfect Caleb, the businessman, had been drowning in addiction. His empire was built on lies. Naomi's mask cracked when David showed that her so-called medical bills weren't just false. They were tied to plastic surgery procedures and luxury vacations. She had stolen her mother's money to buy herself a new face and trips to Europe. The jurors' eyes widened. Naomi's tears dried up. Silas's shame deepened when David revealed he hadn't just taken my pension checks. He had forged documents to take out loans in my name. His hands shook so badly he dropped the pen he was holding. His voice broke as he whispered, I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. And Jonah. My baby Jonah. The courtroom gasped when David presented evidence that he had not only sold my jewelry but had pawned Harold's war medals to a collector overseas. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. I saw Jonah's lips tremble, his eyes glistening, but he couldn't look at me. He buried his face in his hands. One by one, their perfect images crumbled. The jury saw them not as grieving children but as thieves, liars, and betrayers. The more the truth came out, the more their unity fractured. Caleb glared at Silas, blaming him for being weak. Naomi hissed at Jonah under her breath. Silas broke down and whispered apologies no one wanted to hear. Jonah sat frozen, as if the weight of the world had finally crushed him. I sat there quietly, my cane across my lap, my eyes never leaving them. They had taken everything from me. My home, my savings, my dignity. But now the truth was stripping them bare in front of the world. The judge called a recess, and as the gavel struck, I rose slowly to my feet. I walked past them, pausing only for a moment. I leaned on my cane, looked directly at them and whispered, You buried me. Now watch as I rise. Their faces were pale, their pride shattered. For the first time, they looked not like my children but like strangers, cornered and afraid. When I stepped outside into the cold air, the reporters swarmed, shouting questions. I didn't answer. I simply lifted my chin, the ghost they had tried to silence now walking boldly in the daylight. And in my heart, I knew, the verdict was coming, and with it, their ruin. The courtroom was tense as we returned after recess. You could feel the air crackle with judgment, as if the walls themselves were hungry for the final truth. The jury members sat stiff and quiet, their eyes hard with certainty. The evidence had spoken, louder than any of my children's desperate excuses. I sat straight, my cane resting across my lap, my body trembling with both age and anticipation. I had waited for this moment, not just for justice but for my own soul's release. I wanted the world to hear what they had done, not just to me, but to the bond between a mother and her children. The judge's voice boomed. The jury has reached a verdict. Every sound in that room faded. I didn't hear the scribbling of pens, the rustling of suits, or the muffled coughs. I heard only the pounding of my heart, slow and heavy, like the beating of a war drum. The foreman stood. His voice was firm, his eyes steady. We, the jury, find the defendants, Caleb Harper, Naomi Harper, Silas Harper, and Jonah Harper, guilty of fraud, forgery, identity theft, and elder abuse. The words hit the room like thunder. Naomi gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Caleb's smirk dissolved, his jaw tightening as rage flickered in his eyes. Silas broke down completely, sobbing into his hands. Jonah sat motionless, his face drained of all color, as though the last shred of life had been stripped from him. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and final. Sentencing will be delivered in 2 weeks. Until then, the defendants are remanded into custody. The guards moved swiftly, their footsteps echoing as they closed in on my children. Caleb resisted at first, snapping, "You can't do this to me. I'm a businessman, I have power." His voice cracked as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. Naomi cried, mascara running down her cheeks as she begged, "Please, I'm their sister, I didn't mean it, I thought." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. Silas went quietly, his body limp, as though he had already accepted his fate. Jonah looked at me for the first time in weeks, his eyes red and broken. "Mom," he whispered. Just that one word. But it was too late. I stood, my cane steady beneath me, and walked past them as they were led away. I didn't speak. I didn't touch them. I didn't even give them the grace of tears. They had buried me once. I would not give them the satisfaction of burying me again with pity. The crowd erupted outside. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed toward me, voices shouted. How does it feel to see justice done? What message do you have for mothers everywhere? Do you forgive your children? I paused on the courthouse steps, the world watching. My heart wanted to scream, to rage, to tell every soul what it feels like to be betrayed by your own blood. But instead, I spoke calmly, each word carrying the weight of a lifetime. They told the world I was dead. They buried me for greed. But today, I stand here alive. Let this be a lesson. No matter how deep they bury you, truth will always dig you back out. And as for forgiveness, I paused, my voice trembling. That belongs to God, not me. The crowd roared, the cameras flashed brighter, and in that moment, I wasn't just a broken mother. I was a symbol of survival. Weeks later at sentencing, the judge dealt the final blow. Caleb was given 10 years for fraud and embezzlement. Naomi received 8 for theft and forgery. Silas was handed 7, though his cooperation earned him a chance for parole. Jonah, the youngest, was given 5, but his betrayal cut me deepest of all. As the gavel fell one last time, I closed my eyes. Justice was done. But justice doesn't mend a broken heart. In the years that followed, I rebuilt. With Lillian's help, I found a small house near the sea, where the mornings smelled of salt and the nights were filled with the lullaby of waves. I filled my garden with tulips again, the same flowers I had planted before they declared me dead. Each bloom was a reminder that life goes on, even after betrayal. I often thought of Harold. I imagined him smiling down on me, proud that I had fought, that I had risen when they tried to bury me. Sometimes I spoke to him at night, telling him about the verdict, about the tulips, about how I survived. As for my children, I never visited them in prison. I never answered their letters. I never took their phone calls. They had chosen greed over love, and in doing so, they had killed something no verdict could ever revive. One evening as the sun dipped low, I sat on my porch with my cane across my knees. Lillian brought me tea, and together we watched the sky burn orange. I whispered to the wind. They buried me alive. But I dug myself out. And in the end, I ruined them. The waves crashed gently in the distance, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. Because this was not just the story of a mother betrayed. This was the story of a mother reborn. Would you forgive your children if they betrayed you this way? Or would you walk away forever like Evelyn? Tell me in the comments below. And don't forget to share this story with someone who believes family is everything, even when family becomes the enemy.